Alright guys, we're on the second part of chapter 22, book 5 of the Godfather. So, if I do a little recap, Lucy Mancini, who was the mistress of Sonny Corleone, for some reason the author is highlighting her, giving the backstory of her life after the death of Sonny Corleone. They gave her a job. They moved to Las Vegas, where the middle child went after the assassination attempt on the Don. But they're kind of using her. It's opportunistic. They're using her name on paper as some sort of business, where they're using her kind of as a launderer in a sense. But they're also helping her. They give her an opportunity, and they gave insight to the difficulty of her having to move on from Sonny. She really loved him, etc. Again, if you made it this far, I'm just trying to remind you of where we're at, okay? So let's finish. Now, sitting at the side of the pool with Jules' blonde head in her lap, she felt an overwhelming tenderness for him. Her loins ached, and without realizing it, her fingers sensuously stroked the skin of his neck. He seemed to be sleeping, not noticing, and she became excited just by the feel of him against her. Suddenly he raised his head from her lap and stood up. He took her by the hand and led her over the grass onto the cement walk. She followed him dutifully, even when he led her into one of the cottages that held his private apartment. When they were inside, he fixed them both big drinks. After the blazing sun and her own sensuous thoughts, the drink went to her head and made her dizzy. Then Jules had his arms around her, and their bodies, naked except for scanty bathing suits, were pressed against each other. Lucy was murmuring, "Don't," but there was no conviction in her voice, and Jules paid no attention to her. He quickly stripped her bathing bra off so that he could fondle her heavy breasts, kissed them, and then stripped off her bathing trunks. And as he did so, kept kissing her body, her rounded belly, and the insides of her thighs. He stood up, struggling out of his own bathing shorts and embracing her. And then, naked in each other's arms, they were lying on his bed, and she could feel him entering her. And it was enough, just a slight touch, for her to reach her climax. And then in the second afterwards, she could read, in the motions of his body, his surprise. She felt the overwhelming shame she had felt before she knew Sonny, but Jules was twisting her body over the edge of the bed, positioning her legs a certain way, and she let him control her limbs and her body, and then he was entering her again and kissing her. And this time she could feel him, but more important, she could tell that he was feeling something too and coming to his climax. When he rolled off her body, Lucy huddled into one of the corners of the bed and began to cry. She felt so ashamed, and then she was shockingly surprised to hear Jules laugh softly and say, "You poor benighted Italian girl. So that's why you kept refusing me all these months. You dope." He said "you dope" with such friendly affection that she turned toward him, and he took her naked body against his, saying, "You are medieval, you are positively medieval." But the voice was soothingly comforting as she continued to weep. Jules lit a cigarette and put it in her mouth so that she choked on the smoke and had to stop crying. "Now listen to me," he said. "If you had had a decent modern raising with the family culture that was part of the 20th century, your problem would have been solved years ago. Now let me tell you what your problem is. It's not the equivalent of being ugly, of having bad skin and squinty eyes that facial surgery really don't solve. Your problem is like having a wart or a mole on your chin, or an improperly formed ear. Stop thinking of it in sexual terms. Stop thinking in your head that you have a big box no man can love because it won't give his penis the necessary friction. What you have is a pelvic malformation, and what we surgeons call a weakening of the pelvic floor. It usually comes after childbearing, but can be simply bad bone structure. It's a common condition, and many women live a life of misery because of it, when a simple operation could fix them up. Some women even commit suicide because of it. But I never figured you for that condition because you have such a beautiful body. I thought it was psychological since I know your story. You told it to me often enough, you and Sonny. But let me give you a thorough physical examination, and I can tell you just exactly how much work will have to be done. Now go in and take a shower." This is hilarious, dude. So Lucy went in and took her shower patiently, and over her protest, Jules made her lie on the bed, legs spread apart. He had an extra doctor's bag in his apartment, and it was open. He also had a small glass top table by the bed which held some other instruments. He was all business now, examining her, sticking his fingers inside of her, moving them around. She was beginning to feel humiliated when he kissed her on the navel and said, almost absent-mindedly, "First time I've enjoyed my work." Then he flipped her over and thrust a finger in her rectum, feeling around, but his other hand was stroking her neck affectionately. When he was finished, he turned her right side up again, kissed her tenderly on the mouth, and said, Baby, I'm going to build you a whole new thing down there, and then I'll try it out personally. It will be a medical. It will be a medical first, and I'll be able to write a paper on it for the official journals. Jules did everything with such good-humored affection. He so obviously cared for her that Lucy got over her shame and embarrassment. He even had the medical textbook down off its shelf to show her a case like her own. And the surgical procedure to correct it, she found herself quite interested. It's a health thing too, Jules said. If you don't get it corrected, you're going to have a hell of a lot of trouble later on with your whole plumbing system. The structure becomes progressively weaker unless it's corrected by surgery. It's a damn shame that old-fashioned prudery keeps a lot of doctors from properly diagnosing and correcting the situation, and a lot of women from complaining about it. Don't talk about it, please don't talk about it, Lucy said. He could see that she was still to some extent ashamed of her secret, embarrassed by her ugly defect. Though to his medically trained mind, this seemed the height of silliness, he was sensitive enough to identify with her. It also put him on the right track to making her feel better. See, I can understand why he put this in the book, because he's a writer himself. And since he's a writer himself, this must be a big issue, honestly. So let me go back here. So what happened to her? He said, "You dope," with such friendly affection that she turned toward him and he took her naked body against his, saying, You are medieval. You are positively medieval. Your problem would have been solved years ago. If you had a decent modern raising, okay, so it's not equivalent to being ugly to, your problem is like having a wart or a mole on your chin or an improperly formed ear. Stop thinking of it in sexual terms. Stop thinking in your head that you have a big box no man can love because it won't give his penis the necessary friction. What you have is a pelvic malformation. A pelvic malformation. So like a bad forming of the pelvic. So where are we? So she was still ashamed of her ugly defect, though to his medically trained mind it seemed the height of silliness. He was sensitive enough to identify with her. It also put him on the right track to making her feel better. Okay, I know your secret, so now I'll tell you mine, he said. You always ask me what I'm doing in this town. One of the youngest and most brilliant surgeons in the East. He was mocking some newspaper reports about himself. The truth is that I'm an abortionist, which in itself is not so bad. So was half the medical profession. But I got caught. I had a friend, a doctor named Kennedy. We interned together, and he's a really straight guy, but he said he'd help me. I understand Tom Hagen had told him if he ever needed help on anything, the Corleone family was indebted to him. So we spoke to Hagen. The next thing I know, the charges were dropped. But the medical association and the Eastern establishment had me blacklisted. So the Corleone family got me this job out here. I make a good living. I do a job that has to be done. These showgirls are always getting knocked up, and aborting them is the easiest thing in the world if they come to me right away. I correct them like you scrape a frying pan. Freddie Corleone is a real terror. By my account, he's knocked up 15 girls while I've been here. I've seriously considered giving him a father-to-son talk about sex, especially since I've had to treat him 3 times for clap, like chlamydia, and once for syphilis. Freddie is the original bareback rider. So Jules stopped talking. He had been deliberately indiscreet, something he never did, so that Lucy would know that other people, including someone she knew and feared a little like Freddie Corleone, also had shameful secrets. Think of it as a piece of elastic in your body that has lost its elasticity, Jules said. By cutting out a piece, you make it tighter, snappier. I'll think about it, Lucy said, but she was sure she was going to go through with it. She trusted Jules absolutely. Then she thought of something else. How much will it cost? Jules frowned. I haven't the facilities here for surgery like that, and I'm not the expert at it. But I have a friend in Los Angeles who's the best in the field and has facilities at the best hospital. In fact, he tightens up all the movie stars when those dames find out that getting their faces and breasts lifted isn't the whole answer to making a man love them. He owes me a few favors, so it won't cost anything. I do his abortions for him. Listen, if it weren't unethical, I'd tell you the names of some of the movie sex queens who have had the operation. So a malformation of the pelvic. She was immediately curious. Oh, come on, tell me, she said. Come on. It would be a delicious piece of gossip, and one of the things about Jules was that she could show her feminine love of gossip without him making fun of it. I'll tell you if you have dinner with me and spend the night with me, Jules said. We have a lot of lost time to make up for because of your silliness. Lucy felt an overwhelming affection to him for being so kind, and she was able to say, You don't have to sleep with me. You know you won't enjoy it the way I am now. Like you won't enjoy it the way I am now. Jules burst out laughing. You dope, you incredible dope. Didn't you ever hear of any other way of making love? Far more ancient, far more civilized? Are you really that innocent? "Oh, that," she said. "Oh, that," he mimicked her. "Nice girls don't do that. Manly men don't do that. Even in the year 1948, well, baby, I can take you to the house of a little old lady right here in Las Vegas who was the youngest madam of the most popular whorehouse in the Wild West days. Back in 1880, I think it was. She likes to talk about the old days. You know what she told me? That those gunslingers, those manly, viral, straight-shooting cowboys would always ask the girls for a French, what we doctors call fellatio, what you call oh that. Did you ever think of doing oh that with your beloved Sonny?" Talking about giving a man fellatio. Sounds bad. I don't want to say it. For the first time, she truly surprised him. She turned on him with what he could think of only as a Mona Lisa smile, his scientific mind immediately darting off on a tangent. Could this be the solving of that centuries-old mystery? And said quietly, "I did everything with Sonny." It was the first time she had ever admitted anything like that to anyone. 2 weeks later, Jules Segal stood in the operating room of the Los Angeles hospital and watched his friend Dr. Frederick Kellner perform the specialty. Before Lucy was put under anesthesia, Jules leaned over and whispered, "I told him you were my special girl, so he's going to put in some real tight walls." But the preliminary pill had already made her dopey, and she didn't laugh or smile. His teasing remark did take away some of the terror of the operation. Dr. Kellner made his incision with the confidence of a pool shark making an easy shot. The technique of any operation to strengthen the pelvic floor required the accomplishment of two objectives. The musculofibrosis pelvic sling had to be shortened so that the slack was taken up, and of course the vaginal opening, the weak spot itself in the pelvic floor, had to be brought forward, brought under the pubic arch, and so relieved from the line of direct pressure above. Repairing the pelvic sling was called parenchyphy. I'm not saying that right. Suturing the vaginal wall was called colfafry. I don't know what the fuck. But Jules saw that Dr. Kellner was working carefully now. The big danger in the cutting was going too deep and hitting the rectum. It was a fairly uncomplicated case. Jules had studied all the x-rays and tests. Nothing should go wrong, except that in surgery, something could always go wrong. Kellner was working on the diaphragm sling. The T forceps held the vaginal flap and the exposing the ani muscle and the fascie which formed its sheath. Kellner's gauze-covered fingers were pushing aside loose connective tissue. Jules kept his eyes on the vaginal wall for the appearance of the veins, the telltale danger signal of injuring the rectum, but old Kellner knew his stuff. He was building a new snatch as easily as a carpenter nails together 2x4 studs. Kellner was trimming away the excess vaginal wall using the fastening down stitch to close the bite taken out of the tissue of the redundant angle, ensuring that no troublesome projections would form. Kellner was trying to insert 3 fingers into the narrowed opening of the lumen, then 2. He just managed to get 2 fingers in, probing deeply, and for a moment he looked up at Jules, and his china blue eyes over the gauze mask twinkled as though asking if that was narrow enough. Then he was busy again with his sutures, like the cuts. It was all over. They wheeled Lucy out to the recovery room, and Jules talked to Kellner. Kellner was cheerful, the best sign that everything had gone well. "No complications at all, my boy," he told Jules. "Nothing growing in there. Very simple case. She has wonderful body tone, unusual in these cases, and now she's in first-class shape for fun and games. I envy you, my boy. Of course you'll have to wait a little while, but then I guarantee you'll like my work." Jules laughed. You're a true Pygmalion, doctor. Really, you are marvelous." Dr. Kellner grunted. "That's all child's play, like your abortions. If society would only be realistic, people like you and I, really talented people, could do important work and leave this stuff for the hacks. By the way, I'll be sending you a girl next week, a very nice girl. They seem to be the ones who always get in trouble. That will make us all square for this job today." So I guess when this book was written, abortions were illegal. So Jules shook his hand. "Thanks, doctor. Come out yourself sometime and I'll see that you get all the courtesies of the house." Kellner gave him a wry smile. "I gamble every day. I don't need your roulette wheels and crap tables. I knock heads with fate too often as it is. You're going to waste out there, Jules. Another couple of years and you can forget about serious surgery. You won't be up to it." He turned away. So Jules knew it was not meant as a reproach but as a warning. Yet it took the heart out of him anyway. Since Lucy wouldn't be out of the recovery room for at least 12 hours, he went out on the town and got drunk. Part of getting drunk was his feeling of relief that everything had worked out so well with Lucy. Man, I'll just keep going. So the next morning when he went to the hospital to visit her, he was surprised to find 2 men at her bedside and flowers all over the room. Lucy was propped up on pillows, her face radiant. Jules was surprised because Lucy had broken with her family and had told him not to notify them unless something went wrong. Of course, Freddie Corleone knew she was in the hospital for a minor operation. That had been necessary so that they both could get time off, and Freddie had told Jules that the hotel would pick up all the bills for Lucy. Lucy was introducing them, and one of the men Jules recognized instantly, the famous Johnny Fontaine. The other was a big, muscular, snotty-looking Italian guy with Jules, and whose name was Nino Valenti. They both shook hands with Jules and then paid no further attention to him. They were kidding Lucy, talking about the old neighborhood in New York, about people and events Jules had no way of sharing. So we said to Lucy, "I'll drop by later. I have to see Dr. Kellner anyway." But Johnny Fontaine was turning the charm on him. "Hey, buddy, we have to leave ourselves. You keep Lucy company. Take good care of her, Doc." Jules noticed a peculiar hoarseness in Johnny Fontaine's voice and remembered suddenly that the man hadn't sung in public for over a year now, that he had won the Academy Award for acting, or for his acting. Could the man's voice have changed so late in life and the papers keeping it a secret, everybody keeping it a secret? Jules loved inside gossip and kept listening to Fontaine's voice in an attempt to diagnose the trouble. It could be simple strain or too much booze and cigarettes or even too much women. The voice had an ugly timbre to it. He could never be called the sweet crooner anymore. "You sound like you have a cold," Jules said to Johnny Fontaine. Fontaine said politely, "Just strain. I tried to sing last night. I guess I just can't accept the fact that my voice changed. Getting old, you know." He gave Jules a what-the-hell grin. Jules said casually, "Didn't you get a doctor to look at it? Maybe it's something that can be fixed." Fontaine was not so charming now. He gave Jules a long, cool look. "That's the first thing I did nearly 2 years ago. Best specialist, my own doctor, who's supposed to be the top guy out here in California. They told me to get a lot of rest, nothing wrong, just getting older. A man's voice changes when he gets older." Fontaine ignored him after that, paying attention to Lucy, charming her as he charmed all women. Jules kept listening to the voice. There had to be a growth on those vocal cords, but then why the hell hadn't the specialist spotted it? Was it malignant and inoperable? Then there was other stuff. He interrupted Fontaine to ask, when was the last time he got examined by a specialist? Fontaine was obviously irritated but trying to be polite for Lucy's sake. "About 18 months ago," he said. "Does your own doctor take a look once in a while?" Jules asked. "Sure he does," Johnny Fontaine said irritably. "He gives me a codeine spray and checks me out. He told me it's just my voice aging, that all the drinking and smoking and other stuff. Maybe you know more than he does." Jules asked, "What's his name?" Fontaine said with just a faint flicker of pride, Tucker, Dr. James Tucker. "What do you think of him?" The name was familiar, linked to famous movie stars, female, and to an expensive health farm. "He's a sharp dresser," Jules said with a grin. Fontaine was angry now. "You think you're a better doctor than he is?" Jules laughed. "Are you a better singer than Carmen Lombardo?" He was surprised to see Nino Valenti break up in laughter, banging his head on his chair. The joke hadn't been that good. Then on the wings of those guffaws, he caught the smell of bourbon and knew that even this, early in the morning, Mr. Valenti, whoever the hell he was at least half drunk. Fontaine was grinning at his friend. "Hey, you're supposed to be laughing at my jokes, not his." Meanwhile, Lucy stretched out her hand to Jules and drew him to her bedside. "He looks like a bum, but he's a brilliant surgeon," Lucy told them. "If he says he's better than Dr. Tucker, then he's better than Dr. Tucker. You listen to him, Johnny." The nurse came in and told them they would have to leave. The resident was going to do some work on Lucy and needed privacy. Jules was amused to see Lucy turn her head away, so when Johnny Fontaine and Nino Valenti kissed her, they would hit her cheek instead of her mouth, but they seemed to expect it. She let Jules kiss her on the mouth and whispered, "Come back this afternoon, please." He nodded. Out in the corridor, Valenti asked him, "What was the operation for? Anything serious?" Jules shook his head. "Just a little female plumbing, absolutely routine. Please believe me, I'm more concerned than you are. I hope to marry the girl." They were looking at him appraisingly, so he asked, "How did you find out she was in the hospital?" "Freddie called us and asked us to look in," Fontaine said. "We all grew up in the same neighborhood. Lucy was maid of honor when Freddie's sister got married." "Oh," Jules said. He didn't let on that he knew the whole story, perhaps because they were so cagey about protecting Lucy and her affair with Sonny. As they walked down the corridor, Jules said to Fontaine, "I have visiting doctor's privileges here. Why don't you let me have a look at your throat?" Fontaine shook his head. "I'm in a hurry." Nino Valenti said, "That's $1 million throat. He can't have cheap doctors looking down it." Jules saw Valenti was grinning at him, obviously on his side. Jules said cheerfully, "I'm no cheap doctor. I was the brightest young surgeon and diagnostician on the East Coast until they got me on a abortion rap." As he had known it would, that made them take him seriously. By admitting his crime, he inspired belief in his claim of high competence. Valenti recovered first. If Johnny can't use you, I got a girlfriend I want you to look at. Not at her throat, though. Fontaine said to him nervously, "How long will you take?" 10 minutes, Jules said. It was a lie, but he believed in telling his stories. I got fucking... So he said, like 10 minutes, Jules said. It was a lie, but he believed in telling lies to people. Truth telling and medicines just didn't go together except in dire emergencies. If then. Okay, Fontaine said. His voice was darker, hoarser with fright. Jules recruited a nurse in a consulting room. It didn't have everything he needed, but there was enough. In less than 10 minutes, he knew there was a growth on the vocal cords. That was easy. Tucker, that incompetent, sartorial son of a bitch of a Hollywood phony, should have been able to spot it. Christ, maybe the guy didn't even have a license, and if he did it, it should be taken away from him. Jules didn't pay any attention to the two men now. He picked up the phone and asked for the throat man at the hospital to come down. Then he swung around and said to Nino Valenti, "I think it might be a long wait for you. You better leave." Fontaine stared at him in utter disbelief. "You son of a bitch, you think you're going to keep me here? You think you're going to fuck around with my throat?" Jules, with more pleasure than he would have thought possible, gave it to him straight between the eyes. "You can do whatever you like," he said. "You've got a growth of some sort on your vocal cords, in your larynx. If we stay here the next few hours, we can nail it down, whether it's malignant or non-malignant, like whether it's growing or not. We can make a decision for surgery or treatment. I can give you the whole story. I can give you the name of a top specialist in America, and we can have him out here on the plane tonight, with your money, that is, and if I think it necessary. But you can walk out of here and see your quack buddy or sweat while you decide to see another doctor or get referred to somebody incompetent. Then if it's malignant and gets big enough, they'll cut out your whole larynx or you'll die. Or you can just sweat. Stick here with me and we can get it all squared away in a few hours. You got anything more important to do?" Valenti said, "Let's stick around, Johnny. What the hell? I'll go down the hall and call the studio. I won't tell them anything, just that we're held up. Then I'll come back here and keep you company." So Valenti, remember, Valenti is the young singer who Johnny Fontaine went back to his old neighborhood to pretty much help him become a musical star, because he feels like the Godfather, Don Corleone, he feels that he's doing him a favor for a favor, you know? It proved to be a very long afternoon, but a rewarding one. The diagnosis of the staff throat man was perfectly sound as far as Jules could see after the x-rays and swab analysis. Halfway through, Johnny Fontaine, his mouth soaked with iodine, retching over the roll of gauze stuck in his mouth, tried to quit. Nino Valenti grabbed him by the shoulders and slammed him back into a chair. When it was all over, Jules grinned at Fontaine and said, "Warts." Fontaine didn't grasp it. Jules said again, "Just some warts. We'll slice them right off like the skin off bologna. In a few months, you'll be okay." So Valenti let out a yell, but Fontaine was still frowning. "How about singing afterward? How will it affect my singing?" Jules shrugged. "On that, there's no guarantee, but since you can't sing now, what's the difference?" Fontaine looked at him with distaste. "Kid, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. You act like you're giving me good news when what you're telling me is maybe I won't sing anymore. Is that right? Maybe I won't sing anymore." Finally, Jules was disgusted. He'd operated as a real doctor. It had been a pleasure. He had done this bastard a real favor, and he was acting as if he'd been done dirt. Jules said coldly, "Listen, Mr. Fontaine, I'm a doctor of medicine, and you can call me doctor, not kid. And I did give you very good news. When I brought you down here, I was certain that you had a malignant growth in your larynx, which would entail cutting out your whole voice box, or which could kill you. I was worried that I might have to tell you that you were a dead man, and I was so delighted when I could say the word warts, because your singing gave me so much pleasure, helped me seduce girls when I was younger, and you're a real artist, but also you're a very spoiled guy. Do you think because you're Johnny Fontaine you can't get cancer, or a brain tumor that's inoperable, or a failure of the heart? Do you think you're never going to die? Well, it's not all sweet music, and if you want to see real trouble, take a walk through this hospital, and you'll sing a love song about warts. So just stop the crap and get on with what you have to do. Your Adolphe Menjou medical man can't get you the proper surgeon, but if he tries to get into the operating room, I suggest you have him arrested for attempted murder." So Jules started to walk out of the room when Valenti said, "Attaboy, Doc, that's telling him." Jules whirled around and said, "Do you always get looped before noontime?" Valenti said, "Sure," and grinned at him with such good humor that Jules said more gently than he had meant to, "You have to figure you'll be dead in 5 years if you keep that up." Talking about his drinking. So Valenti was lumbering up to him with little dancing steps. He threw his arms around Jules. His breath stank of bourbon. He was laughing very hard. 5 years, he's asking. He asked, still laughing. Is it going to take that long? So a month after her operation, Lucy Mancini sat beside the Vegas hotel pool, one hand holding a cocktail, the other hand stroking Jules' head, which lay in her lap. You don't have to build up your courage, Jules said teasingly. I have champagne waiting in our suite. Are you sure it's okay so soon? Lucy asked. I'm the doctor, Jules said. Tonight's the big night. Do you realize I'll be the first surgeon in medical history who tried out the results of his medical first operation? You know, the before and after. I'm going to enjoy writing it up for the journals. Let's see. While the before was distinctly pleasurable for psychological reasons and the sophistication of the surgeon instructor, the post-operative CODIS was extremely rewarding strictly for its neurological. He stopped talking because Lucy had yanked on his hair hard enough for him to yell with pain. She smiled down at him. If you're not satisfied tonight, I can really say it's your fault, she said. I guarantee my work. I planned it even though I just let old Kellner do the manual labor, Jules said. Now let's just rest up. We have a long night of research ahead. When they went up to their suite, they were living together now. Lucy found a surprise waiting, a gourmet supper, and next to her champagne glass, a jeweler's box with a huge diamond engagement ring inside of it. That shows you how much confidence I have in my work, Jules said. Now let's see you earn it. He was very tender, very gentle with her. She was a little scary at first, her flesh jumping away from his touch, but then, reassured, she felt her body building up to a passion she had never known. And when they were done the first time, and Jules whispered, I do good work, she whispered back, oh yes, you do, yes you do. And they both laughed to each other as they started making love again. Oh man. So, a malformation of the pelvic. I feel like that's a secret women keep, man. And I'm glad I know now, you know? I'm glad I know now. So, anyway, that's the end of that chapter and that book. So, the end of book 5, chapter 22. So, yeah. That was, comparatively to all the other chapters of murder and, you know, violence, that was a pleasant chapter, you know? It's very insightful.